I'm David Williams, 82, and some people didn't get their coffee. We're going to wait a few minutes just to let people filter in, and we'll probably get started at like around 4 minutes from now, 3, 4 minutes. So we'll just give an announcement. So if you do want to run out and get coffee, that's a very difficult challenge because the cafeteria isn't open.
Just a second. So here's a clicker, and so it will look like this.
Oh, good. Is there a button to it?
There is. I think it is.
Well, because the reason
That
is,
one?
remember the video?
Right. How's
How
this?
do I start the video? Because
Uh,
mine, I just
it will
touch
start when you click it on it.
when I, but I have to move the mouse onto the. Because remember, it's only one of the squares.
Let me just confirm that.
Okay.
Let me just confirm that. And there'll be a reserved seat for you over here. There you are, right there, but you don't have to sit there till 10:30. And you're up here now.
And it's the forward.
That's forward. That's backward.
Oh, that's right.
Okay. And I will have an answer to your question. Out there and go right and right. and you'll be able to control it from sitting down or whoever is speaking.
We're just doing one slide, so we'll stay up with the names. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right. Thank you very much, fellow class of 82ers. I am really excited to have this panel take place. And we're very fortunate that Yvonne Garcia, who's our class, and at the School of Education in the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging space and teaches anti-racism, will be moderating our panel. And I am going to turn it over to Yvonne and see if this works. Oh. So, Yvonne?
Well, thank you. Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all awake, and if you're not, we're going to wake you up. So, as you know, we are going to be talking about In the Shadows of Slavery, Belonging at Harvard Then and Now. The order in which we will go is first, we have Dr. Alexis Stokes, who is the Associate Chief Diversity Officer here at the college, at the university. And she has more than a decade of experience working with nonprofit and institutions of higher education to increase college and career awareness and to create systemic change to support the success of marginalized communities. I also, before I forget, I want to thank David. David has been amazing, and all of this is thanks to his work. I was telling him that I don't know why we didn't meet each other when we were here, 40 years ago. Can you all believe it? I can't. Because we would have been fast friends. So second will be Simon Levian, who is currently in the interning for the Boston Globe. And he is a senior reporter and news board executive at the Harvard Crimson. So welcome, Simon. And these masks are past, but anyway, I'll keep going. And then third, we will have Penny Outlaw, one of our classmates, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer of Partners in Health and formerly Vice President of WorkZest. And she is Chairman of the Board at the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps and Vice President Human Resources of iRobot and co-president of the Royal House and Slave Quarters Association. So welcome, Penny. And last but not least, the Reverend Theron David Cook, who is the president and CEO of the Institute for Systemic Change, an operational foundation whose mission is to implement permanent social change through the strategic execution of an integrated methodology that uses an interfaith, ecumenically derived ethic to inform its activities. An ordained minister, Many Waters Ministries, a Richmond, Virginia-based apostolic, interdenominational, international ministry dedicated to uplifting communities around the world. So welcome them all. And to quote Shakespeare, without more ado.
Just one quick note. We're going analog for questions.
Yes.
There's some folks up in the audience that have pens and that and some others. If you want to write a question, get a piece of paper and a pen. There's pens to be handed out, and that's how we're going to collect some of the questions. Okay?
We have a taker up there, I believe. All right, without more ado, to quote Shakespeare, Dr. Stokes.
Thank you, thank you. So thank you, one, for having me here. This is really an honor to be here with all of you and be in conversation and in community with each of you. And my hope is really that this will be a conversation of all of us. And because, even for 15 minutes, nobody wants to hear me talk. So I appreciate sharing this with you. As Yvonne said, I'm Alexa Stokes, the Associate Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. I've been in this role since December of 21. Prior to that, I was the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at SEAS, so the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. So I've been at Harvard for about 5 years. And I say that to give a little context of a lot has changed in even those 5 years. And so I can only imagine how different it must be for you all in coming back to campus and having your 40th reunion, as well as to read the report on the history and the legacy of slavery at Harvard as an alum, thinking back on your experience, the many buildings it referenced, and the things that may connect to experiences that you had at Harvard, and what that means for what's happening now. And so I appreciate being able to be here and share a little bit of what's happening now, how that connects to things that you may have read in the report, and then even share a little bit of the belonging then and now that I've seen happen just in the 5 years that I've been here. And so I'm not sure if you all had the chance to watch the conference that happened when the report was released a little over a month ago. If you haven't, I would definitely encourage that you go on the Radcliffe website and watch the videos that are there. But I referenced that conference because it was entitled Telling the Truth of It All. And it's very aligned with how the Office of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, and for the purpose I'll say ODIB because the name is very long, but the ODIB, that aligns with how we approach this work. We want to create programming and initiatives that model transparency, that are rooted in capacity building and learning and development. And I'll quote President Bacow and Dean Tomiko Nago-Brown in saying that we can't dismantle what we don't understand. And so making sure that the things that we are doing are around, one, understanding the history, being transparent, honoring Veritas, as well as saying, okay, now how do we address it? How do we reckon with it? And so I have the honor of working with our Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Sherry Ann Charleston. She is wrapping up her 2nd year. So that translates to, I'm sure you're probably thinking, this is a very new office then. If I've been in it for 7 months and Sherry has been in the office for 2 years. And so it is about a 3-year old office. Prior to Dr. Charleston, we had Dr. John Wilson, who was here to help get the office set up and also administered the Pulse survey about 3 years ago. And so just to give you an idea of the then and now in just those 3 years, our office has gone from 2 to 9. So a lot of growth in a very short amount of time. But it's also a signal of the investment that is happening at the institution. We have gone from a couple of schools having a Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging to, I think we now may have every school that has a director or a Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And so now we have this foundational infrastructure in place, which is, in my opinion, a first step and very key, because then that means we can be strategic about dismantling this thing that we are trying to learn more about and understand versus ad hoc things happening. That we are moving from just an event happening to strategic programs and initiatives, policies and practices that will ultimately shift the culture in a way where everyone can thrive at Harvard and not survive, but thrive. So one of the quotes that I wanted to pull out from the report was, to be meaningful, remedies must be visible, lasting, grounded in a sustained process of engagement, and linked to the nature of the damage done. And so how are we not only creating programs and initiatives that will be impactful, but also in that learning and development space, connecting it to the damage that was done, because that's a part of us understanding what we are trying to dismantle, is to say, we're not creating this financial aid policy just because. We're creating it because we're connecting it to the systemic injustices that are present, not just on our campus, but in the world. And that is a part of the advancement of learning that and the inclusive excellence that we're here to achieve. The other piece that, as I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you, we just wrapped up commencement, and three commencements. And we also wrapped up 8 affinity graduation ceremonies. And at one of them, our keynote speaker was LaTosha Brown, who's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. And something she said has stuck with me since that day. And she kept saying, and there were 70. And what she shared was, she said, in reading the report, there were 70 names of individuals that had been enslaved or a part of Harvard's history and legacy, connected to Harvard's history and legacy of slavery. And she said she's at the Kennedy School this year as a fellow. And she said, I have to keep telling myself when I hit roadblocks, when I hit obstacles, and there were 70. And she said, because those 70 had to even envisioned Harvard being a different place. And anything that we have achieved or anyone has achieved, first there was a vision. And so she asked all of us to close our eyes and to imagine what would the world look like without racism. And she said, I always ask people that question because to achieve anything, you have to first envision it. And so that kind of has stuck with me for the past week of what does Harvard look like in that light? What's our vision for that? How are the things we're creating and the programs, how we're engaging in conversation, how does that fit into that vision? And part of our vision, we have these 4 areas that ODIB focuses on, and one is capacity building. And so in that regard, we launched this semester the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Forum. It was a 3-day capacity building initiative for all community members. This was students, staff, faculty, researchers, where we had panels, we had keynotes, we had workshops on, Yvonne led a workshop on anti-racist education, we had DEI 101, we had trans allyship, we had what does it mean to challenge your notions of professionalism, and where is bias coming into that notion of professionalism, and how is that potentially contradicting our stated goals around diversity and inclusion in the admissions and the recruitment process? What does it mean to pursue a career within diversity and inclusion? And that forum will be an annual event. We'll pair that this upcoming year with a summit that will focus on senior leadership and capacity building in the senior leadership space. What does it mean to be an inclusive leader at Harvard? What are those key things that leaders need to dig into, from the hiring to our policies and practices? Thinking about the working group we currently have on the non-discrimination and anti-bullying policy, which is currently out for public comment. And so that's in the capacity building space. The other is we see ourselves as a convener. And what that means is that we are here to convene groups and offices and units from across campus when there is a strategic priority that needs to be addressed. We do that through the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Leadership Council, which Yvonne sits on, and it's every diversity lead across the schools. And so one of the things you may remember about Harvard is that it's very decentralized. And so to have this leadership council that is specifically geared towards diversity and inclusion that brings individuals from across campus together means that we can strategize together and we can move forward as a university. And we can also learn from each other. When I was at the School of Engineering, I often would contact the School of Public Health. I was often contacting the DIB lead at Hugsy and saying, okay, you're doing this. Tell me about that. What's working? So I'm not reinventing the wheel over here at the engineering school. Are there roadblocks you experienced? Is there something you tried and it didn't work? Tell me before I try it. Because the scholarship is important, but what does that look like in practice? And then what does that look like at Harvard and kind of how to implement it there? And so we have the Leadership Council. We also have the DIB Network. And so the DIB Network, these are individuals that they may not hold diversity and inclusion positions in their title, but they're absolutely doing the work. And so how are we also uplifting the voices and recognizing the individuals that are doing the work? But also, how are we ensuring that we're not pushing forward, unpaid labor or it falling on the shoulders of just marginalized community members, that this is everyone's responsibility to advance this. The other is a catalyst for our office. And so by being a catalyst, we want to push forward innovation in the EDIB space. So we have the Harvard Culture Lab Innovation Fund. And this funds projects that are presented by faculty, by students, by staff each year. We're reviewing applications right now. Actually, the grants can range from $5,000 to $20,000 to fund an initiative. And we've had projects from the gender inclusive restroom map. And so now if you go onto the Harvard map, you can actually search for gender inclusive restrooms so that as you navigate our campus, you are not finding yourselves in positions of, a basic human need. Where do I access a restroom? We've had projects around pronouns. We've had projects around how to say my name. So now in My.Harvard, students can record how to say their name. We have now transitioned that to the HR system, so staff can do the same. And this is a step of how do we make sure someone feels included and welcome from day one. And that is a hit to you on day one of a class, and your professor doesn't pronounce your name correctly. And so now, even as a faculty member, okay, I can go into My.Harvard, listen to all the names, I can practice before the first day, and even to just be able to walk up to a student and immediately say hello and say their name correctly. And the student's like, wait, you know me? You know how to say my name? You took the time to practice and to learn these things. That also indicates something to me as a student that my faculty member took that initiative at the beginning of the semester. So various projects being funded through the Culture Lab Innovation Fund. We also have a Change Maker series. I would encourage you to go onto the ODIB website where we are interviewing change makers from across campus. We started with President Bacow, and then there is now an interview with the new chief of HUPD, Chief Clay, talking about his vision for the police department and how that will move forward, as well as Dean Joan Reed at the medical school, who is the longest standing diversity and inclusion lead at Harvard. She has been at Harvard, I think, for almost 30 years now, and came to Harvard via Harvard's longest standing diversity and inclusion program, the Administrative Fellows Program. And the Administrative Fellows Program is striving to diversify higher ed leadership. It was Harvard's first diversity inclusion program coming out of the Office of the President. It's still standing. I am a product of it. It's the only reason I'm at Harvard. And so again, I encourage you to read about that one as well. If you know individuals that are interested in higher ed leadership, it's an amazing fellowship program to be a part of, to come to Harvard. The other thing our office does is that we do community building. On the community building space, we have the affinity grads that we just did. We also do affinity spaces. We, of course, have been doing those virtual over the last couple of years. We hope to transition to some in-person affinity spaces. The other is we now have a university-wide Heritage Month calendar, so that as a university, we are recognizing Heritage Month in multiple ways, not just events. It guides even when you go onto harvard.edu of what's on that homepage and what you see coming out of HPAC and what you see coming out of different offices is guided by this Heritage Month and identity calendar. The other we have is a community dialogue series, and this is where we bring together people of differing opinions to model what it is to have conversation across difference. And so we've been doing this virtually as well. Our hope is to transition to more of a hybrid model in the fall, with the hope that we can still engage alum from afar to also join in with us. So I'm going to stop there, and then, of course, stick around and so if people have questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stokes. So we will move on to Simon, and you each will have about 7 to 8 minutes because we started. Sorry? I thought I heard someone. Okay.
Let's go.
Yeah, and let's go.
Great.
Simon.
Can you all hear me? Hear me well? Okay. So I wanted to talk about sort of my experience and what I've done with diversity, inclusion, and equity at the college with regard to the reporting I've done. I've done a lot of historical investigative reporting. I spent 2 years or so researching 2 specific pieces. And from those, I've garnered a lot of student perspectives on the state of diversity and inclusion at the university, especially in regard to historical injustices that are perhaps not so far away. So the first I wanted to talk about is this article I wrote about the Ku Klux Klan's historical presence at the university. And I spent about a year researching this. It centers on these 2 photos that I found in the BPL of members of the class of 1924 on class day, posing in full Klan regalia, pointy hats and all, around the John Harvard statue in broad daylight. And this was on class day in 1924. So that kicked off a series of historical inquiry I had about, what is this? What is this? And I found this sort of string of related sort of Klan incidents at the university, particularly a quasi-formal chapter of the KKK at Harvard in the 20s. So I talked to a lot of scholars about this. There was this one professor who teaches a course in Harvard history. He had no idea about it. And at this time, this was 2020, 2021 or so, I was very curious about if Harvard might reckon with this history and how, since the Legacy of Slavery Initiative, which the report was pending at the time, had begun its discussions, begun its research. And I was wondering if they knew anything about this or would include anything about it. And I talked to the Radcliffe dean who was overseeing it. And at the time, she said to me that the 20th century history of Harvard is fairly well known, so we will be not including it in the Legacy of Slavery report. That has since changed, thankfully. If you look at the report, there is a full chapter on the 20th century history of the legacy of slavery. But as I understood from both alums and students that I've talked to about this research, they were very frustrated with this sort of, this narrow focus. But then again, I have to give credit to the dean because she said to me, if our committee was a committee studying the legacy of racism or racism at Harvard historically, it would be a never-ending committee. And given all of this, right, students are very sort of happy to see that so much scholarship and effort has been put into these issues in recent years. However, at the same time, there is a sort of frustration with the slow and methodical pace that the university can sometimes, go by. And that brings me to this sort of second topic I wanted to talk about, which is this particular incident in Adams House on Westmoreland Court recently, where it's a very long story, but after sort of 11 months of reporting, there were these racist caricatures carved into this very ornate fireplace in a lobby. Nobody had really talked about them. There had been infrequent informal student complaints about it to the faculty deans of Adams House for some time, except there hadn't been really any action. You know, they knew they wanted to do something with it, but they didn't know what to do, when to do it. And towards the end of the faculty dean's term, about 2019, 2020, they decided that after consultation with this sort of renovation committee that was working on Adams House, the best move would be to cover these up and not discuss it. And as you might imagine, if you're a student in this house, especially if you're a minority student, and you just see these being covered up, you've raised these concerns, and you hear nothing from your faculty deans about it, it can be a point of frustration. I sort of try to track this, what effectively was described to me by students as a game of bureaucratic hot potato, where there were a lot of different reports, not just the Legacy of Slavery initiative that were ongoing to sort of study how to handle these issues. The renovation committee was working on it, the faculty deans were working on it, but at the end of the day, a lot of my reporting was sort of stonewalled. You know, there was this air that they didn't really want to talk about this. And I found in the archives of the planning office at the university, they had an original blueprint of this fireplace, and it's been covered up. So there's a lot of institutional memory lost. You know, what does this look like? I was trying to hunt for visual images of what this actual racist caricature was. And I found this description in a spreadsheet saying, oh, this is a blueprint that, you know, shows the fireplace. So I requested it from the planning office to view, because there's a formal process. They denied my request. And I managed to get it anyway. And long story short, you know, you couldn't even see the sculptures in question. You know, it was really small. It was you know, it seems so innocuous that, you know, why would they want to keep these from me? And I talked to one of the deans on the renovation committee, and I asked her, do you have any photos of these sculptures? I want to sort of figure out what's here. She said yes. I asked, can I see them? She said no. So what has been frustrating to myself and many of the students who lived in this house was that they understand the university's being careful. They understand the university wants to have very sensitive and appropriate discussions on these types of issues, but many times it can feel like a delay. And oftentimes, you know, a lot of the students I've seen invested in this have shown to me in interviews and so forth that they understand and believe that a lot of the administrators and the professors working on these reports and so forth care so deeply about these issues of the university and reckoning with the history. But at the same time, the slow, dirgy pace of it can be really, really frustrating. So there was a lot of excitement to see this report, the Legacy of Slavery report, finally come out. But as our reporters at the Crimson have seen from both interviewing descendants of the 70 names of the 70 former enslaved people of Harvard affiliates, as well as with folks who have studied this writ large, we've yet to sort of see what these bureaucratic recommendations will do to translate into meaningful action, since they seem very broad by many of the folks we've interviewed by their estimations. So broadly, you know, these issues sometimes feel that they have to, you know, when push comes to shove, that's when the university will address it. But hopefully now there is sort of a lot more momentum to see these things really specifically get addressed and be properly reckoned with.
Thank you so much. Wow. That's why he's interning at the Boston Globe, y'all. All right. Penny, if you will.
No? Oh,
You want this?
yeah, I turned it on. Yeah, now?
Can you use this?
Turn the other one off.
You good?
Now, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. All right. Oh, where to begin? Let me just sort of refocus after them not even being willing to show you pictures of the fireplace. Wow. I'm going to look at the then and now through the lens of belonging and isolation. And the reason I'm choosing that lens is because of the experience that we've all just been through with the pandemic. It just seems like that's in the air. We've all been isolated more than we used to be for a period of time. And I think that in some ways we've missed some senses of belonging because we haven't been able to, as live, connect with our sort of various communities. When I came to Harvard, I grew up in Sharon, Massachusetts. My parents moved there for the school system, out of the city. Sharon is a pretty much all white community and predominantly Jewish. It's like 65 to 70% Jewish. So and we moved there when I was 7, so I went through pretty much all of my school there and graduated from Sharon High School. But I had an interesting experience of certainly being an outsider, being the only black kid in pretty much every one of my classes, and there were no black teachers in Sharon. There were no teachers of color of any kind. But because it was a Jewish community, and those are the holidays that we observed, I don't mean in my house, but you know what I mean, in terms of the whole community and the days that we had out of school, there was, for me, a really nice cultural exchange because there was a family in my neighborhood that was, when we moved in, we didn't know in 1968, how we would be received. And this family immediately came over and, to bring the cake over and met us and established like a lifelong relationship with us, such that we did the Jewish holidays with them, and they did the Christian holidays with us. And this went on until the matriarch of the family died 5 years ago. She was still calling my mom and said, "Am I still invited for Christmas?" And so I was sort of coming off of that cultural exchange on one hand. But on the other hand, I was coming off of really being an outsider in that community in many ways socially, because there were almost no black kids. And so in terms of once you got to be an adolescent and you're getting into dating, it's just not happening because there's really no one. And it was pretty strictly segregated in that respect. But I had the unique experience of being in the majority, and I was very aware of that in terms of religion. Because while the community was a Jewish community, I was well aware that the broader world of Boston, particularly in Massachusetts, wasn't. So it was really a weird thing, a minority in one way and not a minority in another way, sort of all at the same time. And all of this made me, I think, a natural observer. I'm naturally an introvert and sort of an outside observer in many ways. And I think it carried over into what I ended up doing for a living. When I got to Harvard, I think most of us were just frightened and, oh my God, maybe they made a mistake in letting me in here. I think the key was getting a sense of belonging, and I think that came with everybody, of making friends, whoever those friends were. And initially, just that sort of first round of friends. They're people that I still know that I met like the first, I don't know if Paul is here, but Paul Wolfson, but I met him like the 8th day of being here. And on one, so I certainly had a close circle of friends, but I never felt really accepted in terms of the faculty. I never really was able to develop that type of relationship with faculty, and I didn't feel that they were reaching out at all. And when you say that, when history stops, or when Harvard told me in history that they didn't cover history after 1939. What? And what I had proposed for my junior paper was something that was after 1939, which is not, unreasonable in 1981. Wasn't. But I was really pushed into writing a particular paper based on my advisor, the paper that he wanted written, not the paper that I wanted to write. So it was a mixed bag from an academic and a faculty standpoint, because having that mentor in the faculty can really make all the difference. And I think that I might have made different choices, particularly in light of the work that I do now, if I had seen those paths. I went on, after I left Harvard, I went on to investigate discrimination complaints at the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. That was my first job, which was a very intense job because they had you bring both sides in and you had subpoena power. Now that's a thing. I'd like to have it now. Nice. And so you could just, if somebody was accusing somebody of discrimination, you could just subpoena to have the lawyers make them come in, and they would be, unlike our own Congress, they would be in contempt of court if they didn't come, and there were severe penalties. And so I was really moderating conflict, day in, day out, which I turned out to be good at. I had no idea if I would be able to do that or not, and people tended to sink or swim. They provided no training whatsoever, and you're 20 or 21 years old, having dragged people in, and you could actually get a cop too if you thought you needed protection. I mean, it was that type of situation, and I did that for 3 years, and it was incredibly intense. But I guess what I also wanted to say is, along with the sense of not having a close relationship for professors, there's the overwhelming sense at Harvard, I think, which they're trying to get over, this concept of being colorblind. The old, going back 40, 50 years ago, I don't see that you're black. Well, wow. You don't see. Because if you can't see, looking at me, if you can't see that, you don't see. But there's that view of, I'm going to ignore that about you, and then you'll become acceptable. And I really felt that there was a lot of that at Harvard, that colorblindness and that sort of melting pot rather than mosaic thing going on. So in my career, which ended up being HR, and that wasn't by design, it just sort of fell that way, I have done a lot of DEI work as well. And taking the skills that I have in terms of either contract negotiation or getting two people together and getting them to be able to talk it out and not have violence happen, because that was the goal of the conferences. It has sort of led me down a path, I guess, trying to get beyond this sense of needing to be colorblind and being able to look at people for who they are and talk about that, even if it's very different than who you are, and even if you don't fit in that community and don't understand it. I've had that experience recently in my work in terms of trans rights and the trans community coming forward, particularly at Partners in Health, where I was until just about a few weeks ago. But I'm not in the trans community, but in my role, I have to begin to understand their needs and create that same sense of belonging with those folks. And we did a lot of work around that group coming together. But I guess my sort of last comment, it brings this full circle. This work has led me to the Royal House and Slave Quarters. I'm not going to talk about that now because we talked about that 2 days ago. But in that context, it led me to genealogy work. I'm not going to go into the whole story of how. And I was adopted, which I knew since I was a kid. My parents told me that. And I never had any desire to look for my birth parents. My mother, once I became an adult, she assured me that I know who your mother is, so that's me, and I'm not threatened by you going to look for your birth mother. No, I don't think that bothers me. Go do that if you want to do that. And she would mention it every few years, like, I really don't, you won't always have this opportunity, and I don't want you to give that up or feel like there's a disloyalty thing going on. And I assured her that it really wasn't in me. I just didn't have that, wasn't a need until I was approaching 50. And I literally woke up one day with my hair on fire. And I had to have this information. I actually called in, I had a responsible job. I called in sick to work, which they would have wheeled me in. And I figured out in a day how to get this information. I was on a mission. And if you're in Massachusetts, if you're adopted in Massachusetts and born before 1974, you don't even have to go to court. So I found the right government office in a field of broken glass in the middle of nowhere, where they had my real birth certificate, because adoptions in 1960 or 61 were closed, and they were trying to pretend you weren't adopted. And so they created a fake birth certificate for you with the parents that adopted you. So my birth certificate had my adoptive parents on it, and then it's coded to the real birth certificate, which is hidden in this file, which you can get. So there I was, and you're like in the principal's office, those old benches, and you sit there, and there are two people that do this, and you literally sit there and wait to get the most profound information about yourself. And people are just like weeping. And so they gave me this. I went in my car to weep. And the name was so singular. I went home, joined Ancestry.com, was up for 24 hours creating a family trust and getting this information. And at the very end, I Googled the name, and I only Google celebrities like Denzel, but and I didn't see him in the house. So I don't meet someone and Google them, but for whatever reason, I'm glad that I did, because I found my birth grandmother, and her papers were collected at the Schlesinger Library, and I almost fell over.
Wow.
And it turns out that I had met her at Harvard, at Radcliffe, and Marlena and I were drafted into a project by a dean at Radcliffe, which was doing oral histories of alumni of color who'd been out for 40, 50 years. And it turns out that my grandmother was the class of 27. And it couldn't have been more shocking. Yeah, because at the end of this project, the year, Marlene and I think Dorothy West, we did the oral history of. And then they brought us all, I know, this was quite a fright. Where were you? I don't know, they could literally grabbed us, I think we were drinking sherry, Marlena, and they grabbed us away from it and drafted us into this project.
We want to move to
Sorry.
the
Okay.
Reverend so that he's the closer. So thank you.
All right.
That is an amazing story. So.
Can I just say that is true belonging?
Yes, indeed.
Well said there, well said. Because time is running out, and we definitely want to have the question and answers down there, I'm going to truncate what I'm going to say in about 5 minutes. I've gotten 8, but I'm going to really truncate it. But I think it's important to understand why I'm going to be responding the way I did yesterday morning and today and until I die. If Veritas is real, if truth is real, and God is true, you are not in truth, where are you? And if we are here at this esteemed place that we love, I love this place, I always love this place, and I'll tell you why. Because when I got here, I came from Exeter, Phillips Exeter Academy, and I was one of 33 of my classmates, 2 of whom we honored yesterday. And on my first day of Exeter, first day, I'm going from my dorm to the gym about 500 yards, and this white boy, who is a classmate of mine, says, "Let me go with you." And there were about 3 dorms before we reached the gym. And at each time in front of the dorm, there were a group of students, and he would take me around his farm. First day, I said, "Here's my nigger." And I said, "Don't say that." We go to the next dorm. "Here's my nigger." And when we finally get to the gym, thank God, there was this massive guy, John, I forgot his name, Stone, big Native American guy, senior, and Mike said, "Here's my nigger." And he takes that guy, puts him up on the wall, and picks him up from him. "Don't you ever say that." And that was my first day. When I get to Harvard, the only things that you and I had in common that we had to do, if you remember, beloved, was that we had to have the swimming test. Remember? That 100-yard thing, or 50 yards, I don't know. I forget. The other thing was Xbox. And Xbox, I'm so happy, Dean, you're here, because in our Xbox class, we had the reality of what I had experienced for 3.5 years. 3.5 years. I can now lower down and dial it down. 3.5 years of what I experienced at Xbox. It was very normal for me and Indira Talwani and any other Exes to write a paper every week and to have it graded, and then to write another one the next week. It was normal. My first, Dean and I, were in an XBOS class of imperialism, which is my love. History is my love and will continue to be my love. And my first grade on my first paper was a D-. And I looked, I said, wow, I'm taking Harvard a little bit light. I've got to really just buckle down. And my next paper, I get a D. And I said, wow, this is, I'm really going to have to do this. And that's when I asked Dean, I said, Dean, on the third week after I got a C-, Dean, what is your grade? And he goes, I got a D or C or something like that. And I asked my white colleague, what was your grade? He got an A. And I said, wow. And then week 8, the professor comes in and says, I've done you all a great service. I've got an A+ paper here, and I want to give you examples of what excellent writing are. So I've made copies of it for each and every one of you. Look at it. I said, great, thank God. And when he handed that paper out to me, Professor, I immediately took my red pen out and started editing it. And I said, oh my God. And that's when I went to the dean, Marius, and had my papers, 8 of them. And I said to him, who was a great Southern gentleman with a wonderful brogue, said, sir, I think there's a discrepancy between the quality of my work and the grades I'm getting. And he says, sure, this is what I'm here for. He takes my stack of papers, he looked at the first one, and he says, syntax is a little bit off here, but, and he looks at the second one, and he looks up at me, takes his glasses off, and says, thank you, I'll take care of this. And my next grade was an A. And so that was my first exposure to Harvard. And so as we move on, I knew I was going to be a history major. But my first history class, and Courtney Vance, my roommate, was a history major, and I wanted to be just like him, was my first history class was about the progressive era of the United States, where from 1890 to 1910, the consolidation of the finances and the creation of our nation as an imperial state solidified itself. However, the curriculum was so skewed to the right, I realized that, man, anybody could come up with a thesis and put together the syllabus to advance a false narrative. Hence, I did not become a history major. I became an economics major. And that, all you guys who took Ec 10 with me, because most of you did, know doggone well that it was Eckstein who was our teacher. And that book that we used, all right? I'm sitting in this building, in the library over there, preparing for an Ec 10 exam, and I'm reading this particular paragraph. I've got it underlined, highlighted. I've read it 5 times, and next to me is someone who is doing advanced calculus, or they're doing whatever you need to get into medical school. What is that class? Exactly, that one. And she's got this exactly, you know exactly what it is. And I'm looking at her. She's like, oh my God. I'm looking at me. I said, I can read English. What's going on? And then it dawned on me. This paragraph was intentionally obfuscated. so that the concepts of supply and demand, which are simple, were made to be unintelligible to the most critical reader. And so that's how we get here today. How much of the obfuscation in Adam's house was my house? When you told me that, I was like, oh. I loved Adam's house. Courtney, you and I had great times there. And so the point is, beloved, and we're running out of time, when will the obfuscation stop? When will the truth be told in its totality, whether you are uncomfortable, whether you have the privileges that you've gained through historical means, that literally many of us don't know because it was intentionally obfuscated. For example, we talk about the first sin of America as being the importation of Africans. The first sin of America was taking the land by expropriating it from the indigenous people, first through war, through the Pequot War, and then through the King Philip's War. I think it was 1637, and then it was 1676 for the last war. I am a proud Mohawk. I am a proud Shinnecock. You don't see it because you see the African in me, but you don't see the Irish. You don't see the Irish because you're not supposed to. And why is it that? The vast majority of our most virulent racists have Irish names. Bill O'Reilly. Why? Because the Irish were pitted against the blacks in order to cut the lower classes so that the plutocracy in the South and the North could maintain their power, privilege. So until we, Harvard, speak the truth, then it's all obfuscation. And then I'll end here.
Thank you. I asked him to be the closer, now you know why, right? I was like, I need that picture. So, David, you have the first question that may be the one question. We have tons of questions.
First, I want to say that it's really appreciate the audience. Thank you. We would love to have a very long and deep discussion because obviously this subject warrants that, and we are not able to do that with the time. I'm also pretty moved by the stories, and just quickly, a resonant story. Change does happen, and it happens because people make it happen. I never knew that Penny was at the Mass Commission of Discrimination. I happened to, when I got out of school, go and be a undercover, a shill for a real estate sting in Somerville, and I used to. Okay, so I used to I would get a profile, and I think this goes to the environment where Harvard is. Walk out of the gates of the Yard, and what do you experience in Boston in our time, right? And I was given a profile, and I would go to the real estate office, and a similar person was given the same profile, and then I would debrief the Mass Commission Against Discrimination on what I experienced, which was to see no apartments, to be shuffled around, to be treated disrespectfully, and dismissed. And where my friend, because I knew one of the other guys and we weren't supposed to share, but we had fun with it, and he would tell me, yeah, I saw this beautiful place and this beautiful place. And guess what? Simon told me today, where do you live, Simon? I live in Somerville. He lives in Somerville, all right? That's change. And I do think that it comes from this willing to not obfuscate, and it comes from these truth-telling sessions. So I wanted to ask a question because, Alexis, it's great to have you here, and I know there were several questions about, given all the decentralization and the challenges on this campus, how is change and transformation going to happen? I know that Yvonne talks a lot in her sessions about transformative change. So can you maybe comment on how you believe that's going to take place?
Absolutely. So one of the things is, and we saw this in the stories that were shared, and thank you, each of you, for doing that, is that the transformative work doesn't just happen in one space. This is not just admissions work. This is not just HR work. There are academic stories. There are campus climate things happening in the houses. And so therefore, it has to take place in each part of the university for it to be sustainable and effective. And so by having DIB leads in each of the schools, that enables us to do that. And that there is an associate dean of inclusion and belonging within Harvard College that is not only a resource to Harvard College students, but is also working with Dean Khurana on the strategy within the college. And she is actively in collaboration and partnering with the person that is the DIB lead at the medical school, that is the DIB lead at the law school, so that we are all in conversation and collaboration together, and that there aren't inequities across campus. And so that if something's happening within the Graduate School of Education, but then the student that's at the law school doesn't have access, or the undergrad at the college doesn't have access to that. And so, but now we, via the DIB Council, we're able to collaborate on things. So I'll give you the example of when the report was coming out. We all circled up together and we said, okay, how are we each supporting our schools, our communities, and the greater university to process, to understand this report? There is hurt that will come with this report, but then also to strategize around what we're going to do to move forward to reckon and address it as well. And so coming up with that long-term strategy, it eliminates duplication of work as well, in that we can tap into Yvonne and tell, hey, we want to do something around anti-racist education. Let's partner on that because that's already happening at the School of Education. The Divinity School is doing a lot of work around restorative justice. And so Melissa Bartholomew there, partnering with her to say, how do we scale that for the entire university so it's not just sitting at the School of Divinity? And so again, it's everyone's responsibility. Harvard is very large. And so we need to have people positioned throughout the institution in order for this to be sustainable, because it won't be sustainable if just ODIB sitting within the office of the president is kind of coming down saying X, Y, and Z needs to happen, and then hoping that someone within the schools is going to take it up. But instead, we know that there are point people within the schools that are leading these efforts, that we can all do it together and move forward and support each other and have adequate resources and infrastructure in place for it to happen. But then also we can come together and say, okay, how's it going? Annual reports are coming out of each of the schools. One of the questions was around the accountability piece. There are annual reports being submitted by each of the schools now of here's what happened. ODIB submits an annual report. So our annual report for last year is on our website. I invite you to read that, and we're working this summer on the 21-22 annual report, and that will be released towards the fall. And so that is the level of accountability, is when you have to publicly say things, then that means so there's someone out there holding you accountable, but then also it's accountability for yourself of I committed to this, and so now I have to actually return on that, on what my statement said.
that you begin with equity, which is, I think, different than many of the corporate approaches that begin with diversity. We know that across the river at Boston University, there's a Kendi X. Ibram, and a lot of work that's happening. I didn't know if you are coordinating with that effort or other universities. I know the report on slavery, Brown originally, I believe, had a report published prior to the Harvard report. So just interested in sort of what is the collaborative effort, and also what was the reasoning behind leading with equity?
So that's actually a great question because it speaks to the then and now. The name change of having equity first happened in the last year and a half. So even that was a shift. Mm-hmm. The office was originally the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And Dr. Charleston, in coming on, did a listening tour across campus, and one of the themes that came out was we hear people saying that equity is a part of the work, but having it in the name means something because it symbolizes, it sends a message of this is the foundational work, and putting it first also means something. And so we talk a lot about if we don't start with equity and build from that, it won't sustain, it will not be effective. And equity means that we are acknowledging the systemic injustices that are present in our country and in our campus, and then we're actively trying to address those inequities. That doesn't mean that we, from an equality standpoint, doesn't mean we're gonna offer everything, the same thing to everyone. No, it means we recognize the gaps. And we're trying to close those gaps via policies, via practices, via initiatives and programs that we're doing is directly addressing the inequities and the gaps that are there. In addition to that, it means that then we can now start having a conversation about the recruitment and in the classroom and all of those things if we first understand the equity piece of it. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. I want to do a quick lightning round. We have like 5 minutes, and I have one question I know somebody in our audience has that I want to give them the mic for. So just a lightning round because everybody's taken the time to be on this panel. If you have a 1-minute statement that you want to say, or if you don't have anything to say, that's fine as well. Just start with Simon.
So one thing I'll say is that, I think there's been so much momentum as we've discussed with the Conference on Legacy of Slavery and so forth, that these issues will be addressed. But oftentimes, the students often feel, especially those who are particularly invested in these issues, have to be the ones to sort of keep the admins accountable to some extent. So referring back to the Adams House racist caricatures, for example, there was a lot of student feedback given to the faculty deans, as you might imagine, after we came out with that story. And the response was interesting, to say the least. There was a loose panel on the encasing of those statues. Students one night removed it to sort of, and set it aside to expose the statues, put up little signs over it saying, what's under here. The next morning, my editor's like, oh, I want to see that. Walks over, panels replaced, signs gone. It's screwed and bolted down, the panel. And then later in the week, the faculty dean sent out this long message to all the students in the house, all the affiliates, saying, here's the history, here's the understanding we have of this now, here's the date when we're going to have a public discussion about this, which they did have, and you will be able to, as a student, give input in the renovation process of what happens to these statues after, like in the next year or so, which was really encouraging to see. And as I understand it, and as the students have told me about this, is that, I think in many ways, kind of like the Confederate statue issue, though it doesn't map directly on, there's a lot of perspectives of what should be done. You could contextualize it in place, you could leave it there, you could remove it altogether. There's so many different solutions, but as emphasized by students on all these different perspectives, it matters far more about the process than the actual result. And having these public discussions and not sort of wavering once, students want to bring them up, that is sort of what I hope to see in the next few years as these discussions continue to take place more often and more often, that we become more comfortable with them, and also that the admins become less uncomfortable with having them.
I'm going to plug for Simon, okay? Because he's shy. What are you, 20, class of 23, 24? 24. Read his articles. I just, that's all I can say. And we will be watching your star rise, and we really appreciate you being part of our then reflection to get a sense of now and speaking your truth. Thank you. Penny?
Everyone in this room who wants to do something can. I guess that's what I want to say. And I think it's just getting past that, first day of school feeling when you're like, oh, I'm not going to know anyone. And everybody has that. Oop, I thought I turned it on. Everybody.
She can't hear you.
Oh,
The judge can't hear you.
can you hear it? Thank you. What I want to say is that everybody can do something. And sometimes it's just a question of getting past that. The fear of other people, the fear of what they're going to think of me, or letting yourself be drawn. People, I'm not the most open person. I am from New England, and I know that, but I'm aware of that. And people have drawn me into all sorts of projects. I'm involved in like a Marcus Garvey church that was discovered in Cambridge. Wow. And that's just a phone call. I'll take a call, and I'll hang up too. Because I am from here. So be open. People will approach you. People will talk to you about their ideas. There's so many opportunities to get involved. I think it's just a question of really getting over that hurdle of, I'm going to be the only one in the room. I don't know anything about this. That first day of school feeling that we all have. And it's just a question of developing your own, coping strategies to get past the fear of other. And we all have it because it's the unknown. And there's no one sitting in this room that can't make an enormous difference.
Beloved, we're at a zeitgeist that allows for racism to divide us. Our country is divided, and I say it's intentional. Why? Because if you read my sophomore tutorial, The Rise of Indentured Servants into Slavery, you'll come across something that's not taught, and that's Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. 1676, Bacon came from England wanting to have a plantation like the other plantocracies. And Governor William Berkeley said, no, buddy, can't do it. All the good land's taken, and we just finished the Powhatan War, and we barely won that. If you go west, we're going to mess up that treaty. And plus, we go west, going to raise the taxes on my buddies. Ain't going to happen. Nathaniel Bacon decides to get the labor force together, who were all indentured servants, black, red, and white, together. And it took the combined militias of North Carolina, South Carolina, and a frigate from England to put down the Bacon's Rebellion after Bacon died by dysentery. After that, you start seeing in the Virginia Burgess the separation of the classes, where freed indentured servants who are white got guns and property. Freed indentured servants who are red got property, and the freed Africans got nothing. That was a catalyst that ended up having the 1705 Virginia Codes instituting white supremacy that the other colonies started using up and down the 13. What does that have to do with you? What does that have to do with me? Is that we are at a Weimar moment right now. January 6th was, in my opinion, it was equivalent to the beer hall pushed in 1923. Hitler went to jail for that, but he came out after serving part of his sentence. And then, through legal means, 10 years later, was chancellor. And I say this to those of you who want to have a totalitarian government here to preserve your privilege. If you want to have an authoritarian government here to preserve your material wealth, woe unto you. Because if we allow ourselves to fall into the trap that history has put in front of us not to do, then the chickens will come home to roost. I'll leave you with this. 10 years later, Judge Talwani, after Brown versus Board of Education, that Constance Baker Motley wrote the draft for, Martin Luther King thought he had failed. He was depressed. He had not done what had been promised. The integration had not happened because all deliberate speed was the mentality. So if you find yourself with all deliberate speed, think about those who are slow walking to justice. And why? Ask why. The great thing about where we are right now is there's a dichotomy between those who want to maintain a status quo of white privilege and those who want to have a more inclusive, diverse, a America that is truly inclusive of us all. And that's what is going to determine us. And so we have one thing that can change this, and that is God. I'll leave you with this final statement. We here were trained in a Cartesian way. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I learned that it truly is sentio ergo sum. I feel, therefore I am. That's why you feel that passion. I feel, therefore I am. But in order for me to transform, it's amo ergo sum. We have to love and love totally. And once we do that, we'll be in a better place.
Thank you so much. Alexis?
You got the right? Awesome. Hard to follow, but I'll try. I'll leave you with two things, and I usually always, when I end talks, leave with two levels of things that we can do. There's the individual and there's the institutional level, so I'll build a little bit on Penny's point of we all can do something. And the two ways on the institutional individual level is one, never hesitate to name the problem. We can't address a problem if it hasn't been named. So when there is an injustice, when there is a microaggression, when there is an inequity, name it. The second thing is elevate the voices and the work of those of marginalized groups. And we can do that at the individual and at the institutional level. And I'll give you an example, is that I do not speak anywhere without finding a way, and this is my way today, finding a way to weave in that I'm a product of a historically black college or university. And I do that to elevate the work that HBCUs are doing. And it's my individual way of disrupting the white supremacist structure that excellence only looks a certain way and only comes from certain institutions. So I encourage each of you and daily encourage Harvard to figure out a way of how do we name the problem and how do we elevate the work and the voices of marginalized groups.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists. This has been amazing.
So before we close, I did want to have an opportunity to have Courtney here have a comment.
I have a comment. The comment I have, I want to just thank everybody for the panel. I think one of the things that's exciting to me about Harvard, because we all know how we came here back in '78, is that Harvard is now looking like they want to get to the business of mankind, of humankind, I should say. And it's hard work, it's slow work, but it's work, and we have to do it. Because otherwise, we already know what the Civil War, what happened. This is, I'll leave you here, preacher, I'll leave you with this.
Yes.
And I'm closing. Here we go. The garment of destiny. We're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied by a single garment of destiny. I can never be what I'm supposed to be until you are what you're supposed to be. The rich person can never be what they're supposed to be until the poor person is what they're supposed to be. Every person is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And then John Donne, which this poem is from, John Donne goes on toward the end to say, any person's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind, or I should say, humankind. Therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee.
Thank you. Thank you, class of '82. Go out there and change the world. There's still time.
Thank you so much. That was really, really wonderful. Thank you.